Alright, in this video today we are going to spend some time looking at what it means to appeal to a specific audience in writing, as well as what it means to develop your ideas for an audience. Both are very important concepts that are going to play a significant role in what we are doing in A2. So at this point in the course, you will have been introduced to the rhetorical situation, you'll have had some time to consider the way in which audience might shape your writing, and as you move into Unit 2, you'll likely have begun to brainstorm stakeholders who are invested in your topic, as well as think about which specific stakeholder would be the most logical and exigent one to choose as your audience based on your specific purpose. However, the work doesn't stop there. Once you've chosen your specific audience, you need to begin to think about how you are going to appeal specifically to this group based on what you know and can assume about them. So this is where we're going to pick up today with these notes. During this video, make sure that you're taking the time to jot down the most important ideas so that you can reference them in class. And when you are writing your own argument, feel free to stop and review it at any time if you need to. So just to start us off here, I have two images of two very different audiences, likely with two very different sets of expectations. As such, we can assume that the text that is being delivered is going to differ greatly. In order for the author to be successful, it's going to be important that they have some awareness of their audience's expectations, desires, and values. For instance, if the audience that was expecting to watch an old black and white movie were suddenly asked to sit through and experience a very loud rock concert, there would obviously be some frustration because the author would not have correctly read their audience. This ultimately is why understanding and reading your audience becomes so important. So what is it you need to know? I should note that some of this is going to be based on assumptions that you make for the purposes of rhetorical writing. This can be okay as long as we are aware that these are our assumptions. We can make some guesses about how our audience will respond without declaring that everyone within a specific group is going to feel the exact same way or value the exact same thing. So let's begin by considering some of the specifics, starting with age. Do they have kids? Are they just starting college? Are they in their mid-30s? Are they retiring? Do they play bingo at the senior center? Age, I think, is a great example. I would definitely speak differently to a 13-year-old than I would to someone in their mid-30s, even if I were delivering the exact same message. I might use different idioms, different references, different languages. We often make these choices intuitively when we're speaking to different audiences, but it's important that we're aware of how we might be more intentional about this in our writing. Education level. Are they college graduates? Are they college students who have experienced some college? Are they someone who's firmly rooted in academia? Or are they perhaps someone who left school at a young age? And how does this understanding of this group's education level shape and change the way in which you enact your message? Economic status. Is this a group of people who tend to be rolling in the dough? Are they living paycheck to paycheck? Are they somewhere in between? An example of this is if I were a politician and I were giving a speech to a group of unemployed working-class civilians, I might not make a reference to the booming economy because I need to think about how my audience is going to interpret and understand my ideas along the same lines or similar lines. Political, social, religious beliefs. Is this group conservative, liberal? Are they centrist? Are they Christian, Muslim, Jewish, Hindu? And how does our understanding of this worldview shape the way in which we enact our message to this particular audience? Another thing that you'll need to consider as you are shaping your argument is the level of information that your audience has about the subject. Does the reader already know a lot about this topic, or do they know very little about it? What can you assume in terms of their level of information? If they already know a lot, you're probably going to need to spend less time on the basics. If they don't, you definitely want to spend some more time on the basics so that you're not going over their head. A lot of times, one of the things that can happen is we know a whole lot about our topic or our argument, and we assume that our audience knows the same things. So that's why having a really clear understanding of what our reader might know or not know is going to help us be more effective in getting our message across. Do the readers already have strong opinions about this topic? If they do, you want to be careful so that you're not alienating or offending your reader, particularly if your opinion differs or if there's a chance that your opinion might differ from that of your audience. The third thing that you want to consider is values. The author should always consider what the audience values and think about how they can appeal to that. So, does the audience value freedom of speech, privacy, academic freedom, financial security? If you have chosen a specific stakeholder for your audience, you should be able to make some assumptions about what that group values. Having a sense of these values is going to help you better reach your audience. For instance, if you assume that your audience cares very deeply about the environment, then you can find a way to use that value and appeal to that value in your argument. So as a final note, the author should think about who will read their text before they write it, while they write it, and adjust their text to help their reader understand it. So in summary, you want to continually be thinking about who you're writing to as you're working on this argument. Now that pretty much wraps up our notes on writing to a specific audience. The other thing that we're going to talk about today is development. Now, development and audience are actually very closely linked. You'll notice that part of the hierarchy of rhetorical concerns includes a section entitled Development for Audience, and this is connected to everyone's assignment sheet. So these notes are going to take us a step further by helping us consider how we might develop our ideas with an audience in mind. So as a quick review, in this course, when we talk about development, we're talking about how writers choose to elaborate on their main ideas in their writing. So what does development look like in an argument? Now, it generally includes two components, evidence and explanation. Now, evidence we're already pretty familiar with. We've been researching for a while. It can include quotations from expert statistics, facts, graphs, charts, photos, or other images. In Unit 1, we talked about the way in which evidence tends to be these more specific types of information that ultimately support the larger and broader concepts. So having evidence is going to be very important to your argument, but it's not enough just to include the evidence. You have to also explain it clearly for your intended audience and help them understand it. While evidence is drawn from the text, the explanation of that evidence is drawn from you and your own thinking. So the explanation piece is where your own ideas come into play. So what does this kind of development look like? We're going to take a minute to run through a quick example. We have here the pieces of an argument, which is hopefully what you will have when you begin writing your paper. We have a claim, we have a reason, and we have several pieces of evidence that supports that reason. So maybe not an entire argument mapped out, but one branch of that argument tree that we continually refer back to. Now, just so we can get a sense of how these pieces fit together, I'm going to run through this. Our claim is all U.S. states should pass laws that make texting while driving a primary offense. So this is what the student author is advocating for. This is what they want to see happen. A reason or a because statement is that banning texting while driving would significantly decrease traffic deaths. Okay, so we have a clear kind of because statement that obviously supports this claim. Additionally, we have three different pieces of evidence, all which support that reason, all which are clearly linked to that reason. So that is where we're starting. From there, the author is able to construct this paragraph using all of those ideas. So the paragraph reads as follows. Making texting while driving a primary offense would decrease traffic deaths. A 2006 study from Australia found that in just 2 Australian states, an estimated 45,600 people had near misses in their cars due to cell phone use. And they're citing, that's a striking number. The New York Times reports that when long-haul truck drivers texted in their vehicle, their collision risk was 23 times greater than when not texting. Another citation. Furthermore, in California, a law requiring hands-free devices in cars saves an estimated 300 lives per year. Clearly, making this a primary offense is a good idea. So having read through this, I want us to think about what is problematic about this paragraph. And the first answer that we usually get, or I usually get, is that it seems really short, right? However, if we look closer, we can see that when we cross out the facts and the evidence, very little is actually being said about the evidence by the author. So the author is relying solely on these facts and this information to carry the argument rather than using their own voice to appeal to their audience and to show their audience why this evidence is so important. Now I have here a longer example of a paragraph with the exact same reason and the exact same evidence, except this time the author is actually taking the time to really develop each piece of evidence, to make connections back to the reason, and to show the intended audience why these facts are so important. And I'm going to take us through line by line just so that we can really get a sense of what the author is doing here. Now we can assume that the author has already written their introductory paragraph, they've provided some background information, and they've stated their claim, which is that all states should make texting while driving a primary offense. So they begin this next paragraph with a clearly stated reason. One reason all U.S. states should make texting while driving a primary offense is because such a law would decrease traffic deaths, and there is plenty of proof to support this fact. So we not only see a really clear transition from thesis to key point, we also get a preview of the idea that there is going to be support that follows. From there, the reader introduces the first piece of evidence, which supports the idea that there would be a decrease in traffic deaths. So, for example, a 2006 study done in Australia found that in just 2 Australian states, an estimated 45,600 people had near misses in their cars due to cell phone use. But rather than leave it at that and allow the evidence to speak for them, the author really takes some time to show how this information supports the key point and why it's important. If there were a law banning texting in the car, the number of near misses and logically actual crashes would decrease significantly, ultimately saving lives. So you see that the author isn't repeating the evidence, they're showing how that information ultimately connects and ties back. And we can see that each piece of evidence is developed here in a similar way. And then when we finally get to the end of the paragraph and every piece of evidence is clearly connected back to that key point, we have a connection back to the thesis as well. Clearly making this a primary offense is a good idea. So hopefully this gives you a good idea of the kind of development needed in this writing task in order to make your argument effective. Finally, I'd like to tie this back to intended audience, because ultimately everything that we do in this paper should in some way connect to our reader. So we've examined our intended audience's values, knowledge, etc. And in doing that, you also want to think about how that might affect the evidence that you provide, the explanation you give, and shape both of those things for your particular intended audience. And we're going to talk more about this in class next time. But this should give you a good starting point for thinking about both intended audience and development in your A2.